Hello, welcome back to Oliver's greenhouse. Now, I must explain first of all, this video, as the title reads, is going to be a well overdue update on the orchid collection, how it's expanded. So there's some really cool things which are in flower at the moment. We're going to go through that. But first, I must explain firstly why they've got this really grainy image and poor sound quality. Now, there's a number of reasons. The first big one, I set about 2 hours aside last weekend. I mean, it's the 14th today when I'm recording this. That would have been last weekend. So that's 7 days ago from this point, basically. It's not very clear on the lavalier mic I use whether or not it's actually turned on. So, as a result, after filming the video, I went back to review the footage, which will make up this part one of this this greenhouse update. Had absolutely no sound on it at all. I was less than pleased. Ended up having a rant over on Patreon to my Patreon supporters, so thank you very much for being there for me during my hour of need. So consequently, what I'm going to be doing is narrating this video for you as we go along, taking some notes so I don't just gabble at you the whole way through it. And this is going to be about, I think this video is going to be about 20 minutes long. This section, this will be part one. The second half will be just as completely normal, so it'll be captured in video or during recording. Audio will sound completely the same and be in full HD. It will look lovely. The reason I decided to narrate this video and not just scrap it is the light was so good, as you're going to see in a minute on the video. It was perfect for filming, and it flowed really nicely. It's just a shame didn't capture any of the any of my vocals on it, so that's what we're going to be doing. Now, please also excuse the slightly throaty accent I've got at the moment as well, because I've just got back from a 3-day metal festival here in the UK, up in Derby. So I'm feeling a little bit. No, I'm feeling okay, but my throat is a little bit worse for wear. So we'll soldier through. I don't think it's going to be an issue, and I really enjoyed this video. It looks brilliant. I think it looks really good, and we're going to talk about a lot of cool stuff, and hope you guys enjoy it. So yeah, back over to me. Okay, thanks Oliver for that. Well, as you can see probably by this image already, with my gin and tonic out of the way, the light's absolutely fantastic today, so it's going to make the video look really good. Just checking the gin and tonic safe. It is, yeah, absolutely brilliant. Thanks Oliver. So remember, these are my 5 Paphiopedilum divisions we made. Recently in some of the other videos you may have noticed they had sort of a brown mottled sort of spots that were spreading on them on some of the leaves. I was really concerned about this initially. I thought it could be Pseudomonas or some other sort of bacterial, well, it is a bacterial infection of some sort, but obviously some are worse than others. They've got normal vitality. There's lots of new growth which is emerging from the plants, and so in order to sort of like combat this, I've basically trimmed off a lot of the brown areas and some of the worst affected leaves, and then I've just used normal rose clear, which has got, I think it's got silver iodide, and anyway it's got antifungal, but it's used for treating black spot and stuff on rose leaves. So I've cut the leaves back here, I've sprayed them, and I'm just monitoring the progression along the cut points here to see whether or not the actual infection continues to spread or whether it's completely arrested. So we'll have to wait and see about that. Moving on swiftly, we are going to head over to have a look at my vanilla planifolia. This is the one with the little variegated leaves. Now apparently some people really struggle with these and find them they're sort of like, a lot of people have said that either you can grow them or they just die. This guy seems to do really well for me. It's my shoulder, and has produced a lot of new growth, or certainly extended, because obviously it's vines, and it's I'm just pointing at the media there. This is growing in medium grade fir bark with some peat moss mixed in. And we're going to have a little close-up look at the variegated leaves. So it's got these sort of yellow striping down the centre of the leaf, and it's producing masses of these little aerial roots which wind their way around stuff as the plant climbs. So I've built this little climbing frame out of just orchid stakes using a glue gun, just to give it something to actually grow up, because otherwise it's just going to flop over the place. So I've got some room to extend on it, although I'm probably going to have to go ahead. There's one of the aerial roots clinging onto the actual stake there that I've glued in place. So it's climbing happily. I'm probably going to have to look at actually building a bigger cage, something bigger for it to climb up at some point, because It's growing great guns. It's doing really, really well. It's quite funny how I hear, some people sort of either do really, really well with these, find them really easy to grow, or just really, really struggle. This just gets normal intermediate orchid treatment. It's pretty chilly down there in winter, and it doesn't seem to struggle. It's got good drainage, but also the peat moss helps to keep a lot of moisture in the potting mix for it. So it seems to be very happy under my culture. Another orchid which has been doing really well in the greenhouse recently is my tiny little Lepanthes. Now this is a little warm growing miniature epiphytic orchid from places like Ecuador. I think actually this came from Ecuador, and it's got these very, very pretty leaves with the dark green veins, and it's a sequential bloomer, so you get a succession, strangely enough, of blooms emerging from sort of the middle of the leaf near where it connects to the petiole, so you get this weird hanging chain appendage, which we can sort of see in the centre of that leaf. Probably won't focus on it. Where it's bloomed from many times. Now this guy's mounted on some epi web, and it's also got just a little pad of sphagnum moss on there. And the key with these things is just keeping the humidity up, which is why it's kept over the back here, sort of away from any direct sunlight, and in this plastic orb which provides almost constant high humidity. And these guys will flourish for you. Warmer temperatures and high humidity. Quite a new arrival to my greenhouse, or certainly to my collection, is this Cyclops orchid. This was just an impulse buy I got off of eBay. It was one of those sort of like cheap enough to take a punt at, and it worked out really well because it came as quite a big plant. This is Cyclops Mariposa Green Valley, which is a hybrid, but it's got the most fascinating flowers, and I really wanted to see if I could get one of these to bloom myself. Just as a bit of a challenge really, and that came with a flower spike. You see it came from Schwerter Orchidine originally, so a well-known European grower, and unfortunately when it arrived after transit, the flower spike was already snapped off, which was a real pain in the backside because these are sequential bloomers, so they should produce a flower, drop the flower, and then produce another bud from behind it. We'll have a close. I've got it in some of the holes I've made for air into the pot. Just burnt them through, or melted them through, and I've got it growing in some medium grade orchid bark with some sphagnum moss. There's a nice new growth which is emerging, so that's going to be the latest growth, and you can just see the stem that broke off there, kind of centre shot. So yeah, not my normal type of orchid. What with it being a hybrid. But I just has the most fascinating flowers, and they should fit in quite happily with my my conditions. Now, many of you may be very familiar with this little fella. This is my little Orchids luciana, which I've basically been torturing since I had it. This thing was featured in previous videos where I've been discussing how to save it. And it's a Vandoja species, or sympodial orchid, so it produces a fan of growth from the very top of the grow point. There may actually be a new one finally about to be produced by the plant. You can kind of see it just underneath my finger there. So I'm quite excited about this. Now this little orchid, getting the growth conditions for this has been very, very difficult. I was keeping it too damp, I was keeping it too cold, I was keeping it too bright, I wasn't keeping it bright enough. But it's put on loads of new root growth and seems to be making a real comeback. So fingers crossed this thing's going to look a lot better. I know the leaves are the right colour anyway for the first time in a long time. There's still a few red speckles, but it looks a lot happier. Unlike this fella, this is my cold damaged Phalaenopsis orchid, just mounted. I've had it for years and years, but this is basically what cold damage looks like. Slightly out of focus there. You get this extensive damage or necrosis of the leaf matter, and it's in bloom at the moment. It's putting on a pretty good show. I know I've mentioned it in previous videos, but this thing's basically for the doghouse quite soon. As soon as it's finished, it's just too cold in the greenhouse, and these guys just can't handle it. In an ideal situation, you want to keep these guys at room temperature, relatively humid, and away from anything in excess of moderate light. So pushing on with the rest of the orchids on the mounted wall, let's have a quick zoom out here. Now the next orchid we're going to be looking at was sold to me as Bulbophyllum biflorum, although I'm not entirely sure that is indeed what it actually is. Now this is growing on one of my DIY mounts. It's one of the first orchids I mounted, and you might be able to see there's a little, below this leaf that I'm just touching with my hand there, you might be able to see a little stick just behind the new leaf there. It's kind of horribly out of focus. There we go. So keep your eye out for it. It's just above my finger, not that, that's the root. See that little stick by my finger? I didn't actually pick this up when I was originally recording this, but that's actually a flower spike, and it's extended since then. So I think we're going to have a chance to actually find out the ID of this orchid, because I'm just not convinced it is what they said it was. The next orchid we're looking at, this is Bulbophyllum dolichoglottis. Now this has got very interesting little flowers to be focusing on it. Unfortunately it's not in flower at the moment, but it produces like a grey, sort of black, trifoliate shaped leaf, and it's a very miniature little bulbophyllum. It doesn't get much bigger than this. This is pretty much mature. Once again, growing it on my DIY orchid mounts. The bulbophyllum just seems to do so well on it, and I'm sort of using it now to grow the larger majority of my orchids. The next little orchid I'm just about to pick up, this was a little present from Archie, from Archie's Orchids, so thank you very, very much for that. I do appreciate free orchids. This little division came in the post, and this is Bulbophyllum saltatorium var albociliatum. So it's got a really long name. I don't know how big this guy's going to get. It's produced this new growth in my fingers there. That was the first bulb it came with. That's actually dead as a door now. That can just be removed from the plant. Since then it's anchored itself nicely onto the mount, producing quite a few new roots. And it seems to be growing quite well in my care, which is good. So pop him back up there. Some of you may remember this orchid has featured in a lot of previous videos. Now I've had this for a long time. This is Dendrobium dichioides, and I have been torturing this thing for months. But I've noticed the other day, and hopefully we're going to be able to focus in, it's produced quite a lot of new growth. All the new growth is the fresh green leaves and stems which are emerging from almost sort of the centre of the plant. Now I was growing this thing too bright for ages, and it turned a horrible purple colour, which is a clear indicator that your plant is getting too much light. And I was passing it the other day, and I was sort of noticed that on the end of some of the pseudobulbs there seems to be some sort of like appendages which had appeared, and I sort of noticed it and thought, this is a little bit unusual. What on earth is it? And on closer inspection it appears that it's going to flower. Now if I remember rightly, we're going to zoom into the rear wall of the greenhouse. We're going to zoom into the plant itself. Can you see those nodes coming out of that pseudobulb? Those are flower spikes, and there's also some there on my fingernail as well, and some emerging elsewhere on the plant. Now this is a really pretty little orchid. It produces profusion of little tiny, there's quite a well developed one, you can actually see the buds on that as well. A profusion of little pink flowers clusters which sort of emerge all over the plant, and it looks really pretty. And it's a great little orchid, but the trouble is, it's like so many, it's one of those ones I just couldn't quite get the culture right. But this year it's done really well, so I'm super pleased with that, and I'm looking forward to it flowering. Moving swiftly on, this is my, as probably some of you may know, my most treasured bulbophyllum. This is Bulbophyllum barbagirum. This is an African species, and it produces probably the weirdest flowers of the entire orchid world as far as I'm concerned, if it focuses on. And this thing's grown great guns since mounting it on this. Loads and loads of sphagnum moss used in the media for this guy now. It likes to be kept really moist, and also likes to be kept slightly warmer than I do, but it will trot along quite happily at intermediate levels. It did produce some appendages which really looked like they were going to be flower spikes, but as of yet nothing's developed. But I will soon let you know. As soon as this guy starts to flower, it will definitely be going on there. Be going up on YouTube. It's one of my all-time favourite orchids, so fingers crossed at some point we'll see it do its thing. Just popping back up there on the wall. Right, okay, so the next orchid we're going to, this is the only bulbophyllum I currently have which is just growing on cork, and it's got a little bit of sphagnum moss which is tied onto the mount. It came like this when I purchased it. This is Bulbophyllum maximum. And I was a little bit concerned this thing was going to get a bit too dry on this mount, because usually I like to use a little bit more of a pad, and I like using my own mounts because they retain moisture. But so far it's done pretty well, so no problems with that guy. Changing species completely, we're going to see, well, I'm going to pick up my little Pluritalis. Now this is little Pluritalis shidey, or shidey, I think it's shidey. And this is a right funny little fella, this is. Tiny little orchid. This is pretty much fully mature. Hopefully it's going to focus in. There we go, thank you camera. So a tiny little bit of cork with a bit of sphagnum moss. And this also has very unusual flowers with sort of like wax-like appendages which wave and flap in the wind. And it came as only a very small division. It's put on lots of new growth since I had it. And I keep it very shaded and very cool, tucked out the way behind lots of other orchids. That way it remains nice and protected. So it sits down here next to the Scaphosepalum and under that bulbophyllum leaf. Moving back to the world of bulbophyllum, this is an accidental division. This is bulbophyllum Weberi. It was one of these classics. Got a new orchid, unpotted it, and it appeared to be, well, what I can describe as two divisions. So as I unpotted it, it sort of fell into two. And I thought, well, what do I do with this guy? Let's stick him on a mount and see how he gets on. The other guy's growing on a saucer mount. So I popped him on here, sewed him on. And since then he's grown a nice new growth, lots of new roots, and if anything, you may argue he's a little bit too light in colour, but apart from that, doing well. Moving on to another accidental division. This is a division of bulbophyllum Elizabeth and Buckleberry. Hopefully the camera's going to focus in on it rather than focusing in on the background in a minute. There we go. And this is saying came from my long-suffering plant, which I've had for years. I unpotted it and this bit just sort of fell off, so I potted it up. Since then it's produced a new growth, so I'd quite like to see this orchid flower when mounted. I think it would look stunning. So this is my standard sort of mounting media, which is small bark media or fir bark and sphagnum moss. This next section of the video we're going to be concentrating onto a species of orchid I'm really falling in love with now. This is my Scaphosepalum collection. This plant particular is Scaphosepalum odontocylum, which has got very unusual, like all species of Scaphosepalum, very unusual shaped flowers that actually remain upside down rather than inverting up the right way like they usually do, which is sort of unique in the plant world. This one is Scaphosepalum macrodactylum. Now, these came as quite small plants. They're really starting to put on lots of new growth. We're going to have a real close zoom in. This is what one of the flowers looks like. It's not quite open yet, but it will be soon. You can kind of see that centre is shot. And some of them are producing huge amounts of blooms. They're really growing extremely well in my conditions. Now these guys like to be kept nice and cool and in very high humidity. And they're actually all growing in almost pure sphagnum moss in those pots, mixed in with a little bit of grow stone just to ensure that aeration is maintained in the media and that it doesn't go sour, soggy and nasty. I've actually, the beauty about these little orchids is I find them relatively easy to keep, and they're very profuse growers as long as you're able to keep the conditions just right. This is Scaphosepalum gibbosum we're looking at directly in centre of shot. This is featured in a number of my previous videos, and this thing is going flower mad. There are loads of flower spikes on this, some of which are already open, others of which are still developing. And you can see the older leaves there, they're starting to tarnish at the end. I have a little bit of a close-up of the flowers. Now gibbosum means boat-like sepals, which is what the sepals are actually at the top, which is unusual because they don't, most flowers when they open rotate to be up the right way so that the anther and the stamen are orientated in an upward fashion. These are all the new flower spikes. I think there's up to 8 new flower spikes emerging from this plant at the moment. Lots of new growth, so the new leaves are nice and shiny and green in the centre of the plant there where I'm putting it apart. You can see some of those. And I'm starting to really get a collection of these going. They're almost constantly in flower, which is the best thing about them. So not only are they really pretty, but they flower almost all of the time. And here's another 2 I've got mounted. The one in the centre of shot is Scaphosepalum octhodes. I've had this one a long time. And well, no, it's not a long time, but it's the one I've had the longest. And I just decided to mount it and see if I could grow it in this fashion. And it's sort of waving around, sort of out of focus in front of shot. Has a nice close-up. You can really see how the new growth's emerged. It's produced this new flower spike, which has got sequential flowers on it, so it's got a number of them which are open. It's actually still got the original flower spike it came with, which is going to be a good 6 months old now, and it's still flowering merrily away. Great little orchids. If you like little no fuss orchids which are constantly in flower, these really are the guys for you. In fact, I've actually recently purchased a few more from Equigenera, so they're coming all the way over on the aeroplane quite soon, and then getting posted to me from Germany at some point next month actually. Particularly pretty little Scaphosepalum species. This is Scaphosepalum marinoi, or marinoi. I'll put it down below, so you should be able to read this. And this is just growing on cork. I don't think it's got any sphagnum at all, but it produces the most beautiful little flowers. They've got very, very long wings. It produces lots and lots and lots of flower spikes. You can see the slightly older purple leaves in the background. Here's an idea of what the flowers look like. This long tongue, or this long protuberance from the front of the flower, and then these unusual wings. It's a bit of a close-up. You can almost see how pretty the colours are. And so it's got these sort of red stripes inside. And yeah, great little orchids. Okay, well that's it for part 1. Make sure you stay tuned for the second instalment of this video. And thanks for watching.